This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. NBA off-season, special edition of The Baseline NBA podcast as we continue to discuss the free agent tracking. That's right, the Fat Tracker's full effect. My man Shaw and I break down some of the more important free agency acquisitions taking place. Free agency moratorium is it's done to it's time to put ink to paper, but there were still some big decisions that had to be made on some key name players. They were still kind of dangling out there on what their decision-making process was going to be. We now know where their destinations are, and it has and will definitely shake things up in the NBA. So let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado. www.shawsports.net is the website that you go to. My man, Big Kahuna PNC, Warren Shaw repping down out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Mr. Shaw, are we now fully embedded in the chaos that is free agency now?
I don't think we have a choice but to be, especially after those 4th of July shenanigans and antics and the decision of Gordon Heyward. I'm going here, but maybe no, not yet. Let me wait to get my Players Tribune article together. This has been a very interesting free agency, to say the very least. And, a lot of people out there are upset because they don't feel like a guy like Gordon Heyward should be the prize jewel of any free agency class. But nevertheless, there's a lot of movement. And that we're going to get into as we move through the show as well, too. After Heyward getting his signature on some paper, lots of other moves being done immediately following.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, for the one guy who hasn't been on the basketball court since the beginning of last year, practically, now an important name to an important team. And whether or not the chemistry of Rudy Gay and the destination that he's going to for the next 2 years, can that work? Can that help supplant the team that we're going to discuss in regard? Kelly Olynyk, now that Gordon Heyward has made his presence felt to become a Celtic, that means Kelly Olynyk is out the door. So there's still so many things that we still have to discuss, the ramifications of the Gordon Heyward deal. But more importantly, some of these other important signings. So, Shaw, let's go ahead and just sink our teeth right into the main crux of this. Gordon Heyward, he goes on Players Tribune, says it, tore him apart, and I guess that's the avenue now in modern day NBA players' decision-making process. If you're going to, put out this heartfelt, goodbye kumbaya, then do it on Players Tribune. I mean, I feel like that is the go-to source now for any player who just doesn't want to stand or walk into the front office of their former team and just lay it out there that I no longer want to come play for you. But let's just look at it for what it is. He's basically saying to himself, I want to do this thing with Brad Stevens, more so than Quinn Snyder. Is that a good play for Gordon Heyward?
Well, I think there's more to it than the Stevens pitch. I mean, if you look at it from another angle, he's been with Quinn Snyder longer than he was ever with Brad Stevens in a lot of ways. So, or just about the same amount of time. I feel Heyward is a guy who might be looking at his overall brand, the opportunities that just come with being a player in Boston, and then even being closer to the Northeast. New York is just a hop, skip, and jumping away. And Heyward could just kind of be a better overall player. And not to mention all those guys, we talked about on our last show, all that movement that headed west. Heyward has a better chance to be a perennial all-star now in the Eastern Conference with guys that play his position at the wing, like Paul George and Jimmy Butler now in the Western Conference. So all those things play into it, and the Boston Celtics are just further ahead than the Utah Jazz are when in terms of the respective development, although it does really, really burn and hurt for Utah fans because this is a team that had finally did everything that they wanted to get done, added veteran pieces around Heyward. He got to be an all-star this year. They made the playoffs this year. We're a high seed. And it just, again, it's just like that. Just as quickly as it came together, as quickly as it falls apart.
I mean, but you got the sense, though, that Gordon Heyward, may have felt comfortable in Utah, but I don't think he felt that is where he wants to lay his hat. There's something to be said about certain players in the climate of this NBA that we're dealing with right now. Social media, marketability. I do really believe that Gordon Heyward, maybe in some semblance, thinks that, he can be that modern day Larry Bird, that he can come in there and kind of revitalize people's perceptions of the great Celtics, of old. And look, let's be realistic. Celtics fans are very, very traditional. They're very home based. I mean, at times I often feel like they've skipped over the fact that they won a title, within the last 10 years, with the team that was done by Doc Rivers, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen. They almost seem to think that it was just Paul Pierce that won them that title, right? So I feel like in some ways, maybe that's part of the logic, maybe, for Gordon Hayward. Look, how about give kudos to Gordon Hayward? Finally, somebody who, minus the fact that there were some trades that were done, but finally somebody from the Western Conference who's trying to make a play in the Eastern Conference to increase the probability of finding himself playing in an NBA Finals at some particular point. Because it seemed like all the talent was leaving the Eastern Conference to go to the Western Conference.
Yeah. Well, let's take this on for size real quick. Let me get on my soapbox. All these people out there, right, have been dogging, and I'm going to go left here. I'm going to get back to your point. We're going to go left here for a second. Dogging Danny Ainge, and we've picked at him and things of that nature as well too. Oh, you let Jimmy Butler go away. Oh, you let Paul George get away. They knew that Gordon Hayward was their prize goal, right? Hayward decides to sign with the Celtics. And now, the Celtics still not good. They still suck. They're not going to beat Cleveland. It's like there was no winning possible for Ainge and the Boston Celtics in this, and at least from the public perception standpoint. Because then the narrative is, well, if they didn't get him, Ainge whiffed on Hayward too. His number one target, he didn't get him. But he got him still. And there's still the vitriol, all the BS out there that, yes, we know the Celtics still need to make other moves. But to sit here and now to just kind of slap the Celtics in the face as a result of actually getting their guy, it drives me insane. I said this on Twitter, right? If the Utah Jazz would have kept him, perception, what a great guy. He comes back to their team. That young team has such a great future. Knowing that they have no chance of beating Golden State in the Western Conference, but people would have been happy with that. He goes to Miami. Pat Riley. The wily old veteran does it again. Kudos to Pat, getting a young Hayward down there to get the Heat on the right path to success. Boston gets him. You still suck. You can't beat Cleveland. What kind of BS are we living with right now where that is the narrative?
Well,
with the Boston
but let me play devil's advocate for a moment, Shaw, because I completely agree with you. I mean, you can't win for losing. I throw that out there numerous times. Big up to Little Brother, one of my great hip hop teams, groups that I used to listen to. The problem with the Boston Celtics is this, Shaw. You had a couple of guys that were kind of like a Gordon Hayward in a way, not they weren't, but in a way, like the team was kind of built like that Gordon Hayward. And so now it's almost as if Danny Ainge has to settle for B-level free agents, that they still haven't landed the A+ free agent, right? Now, I don't know. And again, I go back to this whole thing with the Boston Celtics because I keep saying I never believed that has truly been the Boston Celtics MO. Okay. They got lucky in the transition of the NBA ushering into the way that they do things now with the new CBA and stuff. But I just truly believe that a lot of why we believe in the Boston Celtics because it's the homegrown talent. That blue collar homegrown guy, been in the system for 4, 5, 6 years, paid his dues, and he finally is in a position where he can see himself competing for championships. I think that there is a crossing of these ideological, nonsense that's going on with, if the Celtics don't make a play, then they didn't try hard enough. But when they do make a play, it's not the play that you would expect a team that wound up being the first seed last year. Yes, because the Cavaliers, stunk up the joint over the last month and a half. But even if that were the case, the Celtics would have been the second best team in the Eastern Conference. And so now the expectations are you going for the home run play in this window that you have? And it always feels like, I don't know if it will be this way, but it always feels like Danny Ainge is inflicting that upon himself by the way he goes about doing these particular type of deals. So I understand a little bit of the angst from people because when you look at it from its optics, it always seems like the Celtics are settling for this. When to your point, this is what they have. This is what's out there for them. You know what I'm saying? But I just feel like part of that is because the Celtics, for whatever reason, don't stay true to who they are. And they keep trying to think that they're like the Lakers. They keep trying to think that they're like the Knicks. No, this is why the rivalries were so great, because that's exactly who the Lakers are. The Lakers want to spend a ton of money to bring in the players that they want to bring in. When have you ever seen them bring up homegrown players? There's like once in a generation for those guys. The Celtics, they machine them out most of the time. The problem is they can't keep them. And so now we have a situation that's actually the reverse, and it just doesn't sit right with the optics of the Boston Celtics fans.
But it's what I don't understand, and I'm gonna get on the horseback again a little bit here.
Oh, you're back on the soapbox?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Just to what you're saying makes some sense, but my caveat to this is last year Kevin Durant was a prize of free agent. Reports, whatever those things may be, however what sources you want to, how much you want to credence you want to put into that. Durant was very close, and he was pretty much determined to leave OKC no matter what. And I don't think OKC was his second choice. Reports are that Boston really was his second choice. They made such a great impression on him. So that's fine. That's the crown jewel of free agency. But they got the second best free agent last year, which was also a target of theirs in Al Horford. And it was more or less the same conversation that we're having right now. This year, they get what is the best free agent available in Gordon Heyward, and we're still having the same conversation. That is, to me, is what I don't understand. Are they not supposed to try to get better? And I understand the Celtics have their minions, if you will, and a bunch of reporters who put a lot of stuff out there who try to deflect Danny Ainge, some of the decisions that he's made, and puts, I offered this for Jimmy Butler, I offered this for Paul George, and whatever the case may be, and you don't know really what is what. Nevertheless, though, they've been successful in free agency for 2 straight seasons, and it seems like they're that is almost like they haven't. It's almost like they've gotten, how you said, maybe B-list superstars. It's almost like they've gotten D-list rotation players, the way that people are making it seem when they added Al Horford last year and now Gordon Heyward. And that I just can't understand.
Look, I don't disagree with your point, Shaw. I think you bring up a really, really good point. And again, this is part of what we live with when it seems like the visceral attitude and the venom that seems to get thrown out there with regards to Danny Ainge and what the Boston Celtics are trying to do here just doesn't seem to be good enough. And look, let's keep it 100. A lot of this is obviously predicated by what the Cleveland Cavaliers have done and what they have forced other teams to do. We often talk about the fear of LeBron James, and as long as LeBron James is the best player in the game of basketball, it's not realistic that any team really has a reasonable shot at trying to knock off the Cleveland Cavaliers, or however long that LeBron James stays with the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I beg to argue that, look, no one was giving the San Antonio Spurs a shot. And when you look at how that basketball team was constructed, there was homegrown players because that's who the San Antonio Spurs were. So again, I just go back to the point that when it comes to the Boston Celtics, I don't knock the Boston Celtics for going after the marquee free agents. But I guess what I am saying is now at this juncture, let's bring it all the way back here to Gordon Heyward. Gordon Heyward is choosing to sign with the Celtics on a 4-year, $128 million deal, basically, okay? Which essentially is that max contract. You're essentially gutting this team to help get you 50 wins in order to do that. Now, this ain't the Golden State Warriors. You get what I'm saying? It wasn't like when the Golden State Warriors gutted their basketball team, they gutted their bench. They still had their core players. And they moved some pieces around, and we said, will they be able to have enough to still be the complete basketball team that they've been the last 2 years? And somehow they figured out to get their bench players to basically step up and fill in the gaps for the guys like Leandro Barbosa, who is no longer there, and a litany of other guys. We won't get into all those things. But that's what I'm saying. When you're gutting this Celtics team, how much of this team are you truly gutting on the perception that they are going to be a much better basketball team from a competitive standpoint than what we just saw these guys go through for the last 3 seasons?
Well, I think gutting might be a little extreme, but they have lost a lot of their bench, or going to have to lose some.
But Shaw, now we're talking about, in order to facilitate this deal, you're going to probably have to move Jay Crowder. At least that's what the reports say, on a sign and trade. And so what I'm saying is that this team is not going to clearly look the same, even from a starting lineup perspective, simply because of the fact that they made a play for Gordon Heyward, not Kevin Durant, right? So that's
Right.
what I'm
But,
saying.
but I mean, the starting lineup wasn't going to look the same regardless with Hayward coming in. So either you're going to play very small ball, and this deal still isn't finalized as we record this show. So if Crowder is the one to go, I'm in a sign and trade deal. You don't know if Utah is sending anything back at all, or if they're going to do some sort of trade exemption, or whatever the case may be. How Boston makes that actually work. They need to shed, I think it was roughly $3 or something like $1 million of salary to fit Hayward under this max contract, if you will. So yes, there are issues. You know, Olynyk is gone, Amir Johnson is gone. So that's more or less your front court depth right there. You have a crap ton of wings in there with Jaylen Brown and now Jason Tatum and things of that. You know, Gerald Green is going to be gone. So yeah, they're going to have to fill this roster out and get some guys maybe on some minimum deals. But they still have a couple guys stashed overseas. And Danny, for that part of it, at least for his scouting team, they've done a pretty decent job in being able to find fits. Even the guy they dropped in the second round, he's a pretty good fit, but the same thing, he's another wing player. So they do need to get bigger. They need more size, and they haven't addressed the rebounding and rim protection angle at all. But I definitely agree. You know, I don't think this was the anticipated outcome in terms of having to have so many parts and pieces of this team that made it to the Eastern Conference Final last year have to let that kind of go in order to fit Hayward under this contract. But at the same time, if you want to get good, it is going to cost you some players in some ways in order to do so. And Boston, they're just in a very precarious situation, especially when you look at IT and Avery Bradley. All those guys are due for contracts next summer. You know, Danny Ainge is going to have some salary cap acrobatics that he's going to have to do over the next year.
All right, final question, Shaw, with regards to this, if this does go down and is finalized, does Gordon Heyward become a all-star in his first season as a Boston Celtic?
Yeah, I mean, barring injury, of course, you know, knock on wood, I think there is not much doubt that he should be an all-star level player. Isaiah is going to be feeling great to have another person to take the scoring load off of him. You know, Hayward comes in averaging 20 plus a game from last season. Don't see any reason for that to dissipate and to not be the case here. I think Brad Stevens is going to use him in a variety of ways. A guy who can play good defense, a guy who can create off the pick and roll. Is a good passer as well too. Getting better at more consistent three-point shot. You know, just a guy whose overall versatility is really what Boston is looking forward to. So I think All-Star is definitely in the cards for Gordon Hayward, especially in the Eastern Conference, especially with Jimmy Butler and Paul George now calling the Western Conference their home. There's really not much competition for him to make that spot. Obviously, LeBron will be the starter, but Hayward should definitely make it as a reserve.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our special edition of The Baseline as we start covering additional free agency acquisitions that have taken place since our previous show, where we went into an extensive conversation with, the moves that were being made, trades, and then obviously, some big signings as well, too. So let's go ahead and talk about the second big signing, Shaw, Rudy Gay. Now, I know a lot of people are probably saying to themselves, how the heck does Rudy Gay, who's basically been on the slab for all of last year, basically, and then really for the most part, and is still getting talked about as a quote unquote quality free agent a free agent that's available? Well, now that you couple him with the San Antonio Spurs on a 2-year, $17 million deal, my question to you, Shaw, is, man, how about that for a mix?
Yeah, I mean, I just tweeted out too, same thing. I had no semblance of an idea that I'd ever be saying Rudy Gay and the San Antonio Spurs in the same sentence. It seems like a little bit of an awkward fit. But if anybody can get Rudy Gay to be at his most productive, it's obviously the Spurs and Popovich over there. Still really not clear on Gay's return, from his injury from a season ago. Some said he could be ready by some people at the beginning of the season. Some people saying, it could be January or February. Don't really understand that whole dynamic just yet. And it does make you wonder as well, too, what the lineup would potentially be, assuming he is healthy. Does he go and play the 4 position like how George Karl had him playing in Sacramento? And Yeager, I think, at times, too, put him in there at spots. But Karl was starting him at the 4, 2 years ago. So you wonder if that's kind of what he's agreed to at this stage of his career. Yeah, he's long, he's lengthy, a little bit slighter frame, but the game is changing. So I guess he could kind of get away with it. And then would that mean that LaMarcus Aldridge would be becoming the full-time center? Lots of questions here. This is a little bit perplexing San Antonio doesn't really make moves that make you scratch your head all too often. But Rudy Gay in San Antonio, man, like that's just weird. That's a weird one.
It's a reclamation project to me. I think for in hoops redemption to the umpteenth degree, Rudy Gay has always been known to be that guy. And it was just being talked about it. I was watching the summer league a moment ago. Everywhere he goes to and leaves, the teams wind up being better for it. So I can't imagine that with the San Antonio Spurs being that they have been a 50+ win team, for like the last umpteen years, that they're suddenly going to take a step back from their progression as being one of the better teams in the Southwest Division. I will say that it definitely offers length and versatility at that for that roster that Greg Popovich has now to work with and to play with. But I think the bigger question, one, is the health factor for Rudy Gay, and number two, more importantly, how can he coexist around guys like Kawhi Leonard and LaMarcus Aldridge? I mean, Rudy Gay's ball usage can be pretty high at times. And I know that even under this particular deal, Greg Popovich will not have much patience if this guy is not capable of moving the basketball like he's been able to get his teams to do over the last 5 years.
Well, I think that's a great point, but you have to also wonder now. Rudy Gay is not an idiot at the same time. Is not to say that he couldn't get a deal elsewhere out in free agency. So I think this is a signature move for him in trying to figure out and say that, you know what, he's ready to take the next step of his basketball career. And understanding what the Spurs organization is about, you can't play in the NBA and not know what San Antonio is about. You can't play against them for as long as Rudy Gay's played against them and not know what they're about and what it means to join that organization. So I don't think he's going there to try to be the same old Rudy Gay in essence. And let's cut him a little slack. In Sacramento, he played pretty well. And ever since he left Toronto, he hasn't been that same uber inefficient guy that everybody was clamoring and talking about since his days in Memphis. He's been a better player in Sacramento. I think this move signifies that he's trying to take the next step and trying to take winning very, very seriously. And I think he'll do what he needs to do now that we're talking it out here. But like I said, on his face, it's just like, wow, Rudy Gay, he still has that stigma about him. But hopefully I think that's going to be changing. And you just know the Spurs are going to get into his head, and that culture should seep into Rudy. And you may see some of his best basketball this upcoming season, assuming he's healthy.
Well, now with this signing, though, and you would think that taking a leap like this, that it could also mean that, the Spurs might lose out on Jonathan Simmons. But the word is that because of this signing, they have the ability to, match whatever offer, match whatever offer sheet that Jonathan Simmons signs, as he is a restricted free agent. So that still gives them flexibility in being able to keep Jonathan Simmons while, just throwing, a flyer out there and getting a quality former all-star player like Rudy Gay. So we'll see how that plays. Another interesting signing that took place today, Shaw. Kelly Olynyk. Now, we were just talking about the Boston Celtics. Kelly Olynyk signs a 4-year, $50 million deal with the Miami Heat. I'm a little flabbergasted by this one because you just finished now getting James Johnson, who was really good. Maybe James Johnson knows his worth as being a role player, bench player. I got to imagine that the intent here now is you are bringing Kelly in to be your starting four. Is that what the mindset is? If you're paying this guy $50 million over 4 years?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we just got to talk about the Heat all together here right now, I think, as a collective. So,
Kelly Olynyk, question, the signing of Dion Waiters, I think, was a must. And Dion Waiters would have been a fool not to go anywhere. He is finally in a place where I really think that, his flair, his swag, it plays to the Miami base. And very interestingly enough, he made people kind of forget about Dwayne Wade, jettison himself to Chicago with his play prior to that injury. So I think that, now he's going to be riding that momentum. But I'm just more so a little bit taken back by the Kelly Olynyk signing, because while that is sneakily a decent signing, I guess you could say, depending on how Eric Spoelstra plans to use Kelly Olynyk, I just find it very interesting that it was the Heat that went after Olynyk, and Olynyk essentially says, I'm good with coming to the Miami Heat.
Well, yeah, and I think that what they'll want to do with him is obviously he's going to do what he's good at and try to space the floor, clear some space for Whiteside to operate down low, just don't know if he's going to start. I mean, I think he may start in certain lineups. The Heat are doing another move where they're getting rid of Josh McRoberts and moving him to Dallas. So, Olynyk is going to be that guy now, and he'll get plenty of minutes. But James Johnson re-signing in Miami is also a big thing for them. And he played, he started at the power forward position, the latter part of the season after they had all those injuries, and played extremely great basketball, his best basketball of his career. He's being loyal because I think he could have got a little bit more on the open market out there. So James Johnson might be the guy that they start at the power forward spot on a regular basis, or he would, kind of parry his time with Olynyk at that starting four, and the guy they just drafted too, and Bam, from Kentucky, he's played very, very well too in the summer league. So they have some options at that power forward, guys who give them all very different things, in terms of their versatility. Olynyk with the shooting, I think Bam with the energy, James Johnson with the kind of an overall versatile game, great passer from that spot as well too. Miami's making some nice moves and staying loyal to the guys that they had last year, in addition to adding Olynyk.
Well, I think the word is too that now that by them making this signing for Kelly Olynyk, it probably means that Josh McRoberts' days are numbered with the Miami Heat.
He's being moved to Dallas.
Yeah. So, interesting again play. I think it's an upgrade. I mean, clearly Olynyk is not the type of passer McRoberts is, but I do think you get some toughness. You get a guy that can shoot the three ball.
Get a guy who actually plays.
Yeah, and he actually plays. Yeah, exactly. So this could be a good move all around. And look, we talked about this last year with the Southeast Division. The Miami Heat were right in the thick of it, going all the way up until the final month of the season. And the injuries just caught up with them, where they just could not put the players that they wanted to ride to the end with out there to give themselves a chance to probably play in the playoffs last season. Some of these added pieces that they are now keeping, and some of the guys that they are currently in the drafts that they've taken on. Justice Winslow, again, he's coming of age. This could be a basketball team that people are going to be sleeping on. And we know that teams like the Atlanta Hawks, we know that, the Charlotte Hornets are going to be question mark teams this year. So we don't know. But the Miami Heat could be one of those teams that are ready to step up and probably knock off one of those two teams in the Eastern Conference playoff picture.
Yeah, well, I think Miami, they never want to sit back on their laurels, right? This is a team that consistently everyone, Pats or whatever, is 70-plus years old. And it's like, all right, well, you're going to take this year off and try to rebuild, and that's just not in the cards for this team. And they're going to continue to work and try to find another guy, another reclamation project, as they will, to maybe fill out the rest of this roster too. And I think it is ripe for them in the Eastern Conference. I don't think they were as good as they finished, but I think it was said as well too. They weren't as bad as they started, so they probably ended up where they needed to end up. Roughly around 500. If they play that same type of basketball this year, in the Eastern Conference, when a team like Indiana is obviously weaker right now, when a team like Chicago is obviously weaker as right now, those are two spots that should be up for grabs in the playoffs, and you should be looking at the Miami Heat and obviously those Philadelphia 76ers potentially claim those two spots. But we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with predictions.
Never that, Shaw. Never that. I mean, because then that would just be you geeking over the NBA already, right? Of course.
Yeah, that's an everyday thing.
All right, Shaw. So let's go ahead and finalize out the show with a couple of more other interesting free agency signings. The Sacramento Kings, man, really interesting. So clearly we had talked about, how Vlade Divac had been chastised for his play on sending DeMarcus Cousins to the Pelicans. He turns that around and he flips that into some really quality draft pick guys that he brings on board, and then he goes out and he gets Vince Carter, he gets George Hill, and he gets Zach Randolph. All of these old, wily veteran guys to come and play for the Sacramento Kings. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, this is great because, it doesn't mean that you have to rush De'Aaron Fox out there, and, it gives these guys a veteran presence. Shaw, you know how I feel about this type of stuff, man. I'm okay with it, maybe one or two. But now when you do 2, 3, 4 players like this, man, it really starts making me wonder where your priorities, like what exactly it is that you're doing. Because at some particular point, man, these young kids are going to have to be on the basketball court and they're going to have to play. And now you're going to have to sit here and juggle minutes again with veteran guys that obviously are getting paid to play.
Yeah, it's a little tough because you like what they did in the draft. They get Fox and get some other guys to fill out the rest of that roster. You bring in George Hill, you say, okay, maybe he can mentor Fox, maybe even play off the ball, and those two guys can play together, if you will. Bring in Zebo into what is a crowded front court with Willie Cauley-Stein and all the other bigs that they have, whether Scal, Labissiere, like that. Now you start to like, all right, well, what exactly is happening? Zebo is a great guy to learn from, so you don't know how many minutes he's projected to play or what he's promised to play in this role, being reunited with Coach Yeager over there. But on its face, it seems to be like, hey, like you said, hey, get in the wily veteran to help these young guys mature. But they might have just did it maybe one too many.
You know where I would have where I would have liked to have seen Zach Randolph, Shaw. I know this maybe me being a little nostalgic. I would have loved to have seen him in Portland, man. Finish out his time in Portland, where it started for him. Because it isn't as if the Trailblazers have got their front court, scoring capabilities on lock, right? They definitely need bench scoring help, and they definitely need front court scoring help. And he certainly could have helped that team who found themselves playing in this year's playoffs. So,
yeah, I mean, Zebo is a guy just because of his mentality, and his locker room presence. He probably is a guy who could fit in a lot of different spots in different places. To maybe go down here to finish his career on a team.
Oklahoma City,
Yeah, I mean, and they just re-signed.
Well, they signed Patrick Patterson. Yeah. So yeah. Let me ask you, Shaw, if you had an opportunity to sign Zebo or Patrick Patterson.
Well, for me, I mean, I think it's about styles, right? So Patterson is a guy who people consider to be a stretch for, although he's just doesn't seem to be that great.
He's a stretch. I don't know. That's a stretch. That's a stretch to consider him a stretch, right? Okay.
I mean, but he has the requisite talent, and he looks the part, if you will. So I think he's a better fit alongside Paul George and Westbrook as a guy who, at least in theory, should space the floor, and at least in theory, can play good defense without getting in the way, if you will. Zebo he's a plotter, man. He's gonna go down there and he's gonna rough you up, and he needs to play a slower pace at this stage of his game. So that probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. I think if they could have known exactly what was going on with this, their cap is a little bit stretched, OKC, but they might have maybe tried to wait and maybe make a play for Olynyk. But I don't think they had the numbers in essence to do that. Patterson signed for like a very, very minor deal. So that's why they went and did that and made it happen. But anyway, Zebo is a guy who can fit in a lot of spaces, man. I hope that this is good for him in Sacramento. And we'll see what this team has. There's like our guy Oliver Maroney out there on Twitter wilding out, saying that Sacramento could be a playoff team in the Western Conference. And, he got killed. So I'm not going to touch that just yet. Our guy Oliver.
Oh, the stick of dynamite was too near. It was too close to the seat, huh? All right.
I'm not with that, but like I said, and we tried to give him a little bit of leeway last year with D'Angelo Russell, and you see how things turned out with D'Angelo last year as well too. So hey, this is why they play the games, man. Sacramento, they'll be better than they were last year. That's as far as I'm willing to say.
Now, the signing of George Hill to the Sacramento Kings, that one I do find a little interesting, Shaw, because I think part of my question now goes back to the team that we were talking about earlier that was impacted by Gordon Heyward leaving to go to the Boston Celtics and the Utah Jazz. So are they basically conceding to the fact that they think that Dante Exum is ready to take over the helms and be that point guard? Or are they looking at Raul Neto? Like, what exactly are we talking about here with this Utah Jazz team? Never mind the impact of Hayward. I think the impact of George leaving and them not having a solid point guard unless they truly believe that Exum is ready, I think is going to hurt them.
I mean, let me cut you off there. I mean, we talked about it last year. Remember, they traded for Rubio. So they traded for Rubio because Hayward said he'd love to play with them, more or less. So Rubio came, flew from Spain to go to the meetings and all of that, and then, Hayward still jettisoned, to Boston, if you will. So Rubio is going to be the guy. Exum is someone that is being thrown around potentially in the sign and trade conversation, which I assume the Celtics would just waive or buy him out or try to ship him on because there's no real need for him, I suppose, at this point. But yeah, it seems like Utah, they're married to Rubio right now, and they got to figure out that small forward position. And you still don't know if Derek Favors is technically on the block now as a result of things that happened with Hayward. So Utah's in a very precarious situation, unfortunately. And I like that team. I like what Dennis Lindsey has done, and I want to see them land right, despite Hayward leaving them.
Well, here's the thing though, Shaw. I would have liked to have seen, unless the idea here is that they are comfortable with Rodney Hood as their starting two. I would have liked to have seen George Hill play off the ball like he used to do back in the day in San Antonio.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Hood's got to stay healthy, right? And Alec Burks, he's got to stay healthy. All those guys are still there. So they looking for those opportunities. Remember, our guy, Tony Jones, is a big Rodney Hood fan, and he was saying last year on our podcast that he thought Hood could eventually surpass Hayward as the number one option. Now that might have been a little far fetched, but Hood's, at least in theory, right now as we record, should have all the opportunity he's ever been looking for. And the same thing with Alec Burks. So Brooks maybe gets that starting position at the 2 guard. Hood maybe slides up to the 3 where Hayward was, and those guys run it out there with Rubio, Favors, and Gobert. Solid. I mean, not playoff good, but I mean they'll be competitive. And I think as long as Quinn Snyder's there and preaching defense, Utah will be all right, man. But we still have another big trade we can talk about, man.
Go ahead, lay it on me, brother.
Well, regarding that big 3-way deal, which finds Paul Milsap going to the Denver Nuggets and Danilo Gallinari ending with the Clippers, and I think Atlanta got Jamal Crawford and a pick or something of that nature. I don't have it in front of me right now, but the big move here is the fact that the Hawks are more or less they punted. This is a team that is clearly rebuilding right now, and they don't have much of a future. It's about time, so you see things kind of tearing down a little bit here. And if you want to just put the numbers on the board here a little bit, this is the Memphis Grizzlies, they're done. Chicago Bulls, they're done. Atlanta Hawks, done. 3 teams that we've been clamoring for, saying that they needed to just kind of go in a different direction. And that seems to be the case right now. The Clippers, on the other hand, they're not necessarily done. At least they don't think they are. They're revamping in a completely different way, in different manner. Gallo and LA alongside Blake and DeAndre Jordan, I think is interesting. What they're going to do at that point guard position, they just signed the European guy, Milos. Can't say his last name. Don't want to butcher it. He's a European legend. We'll see how he plays out there as well too. But I think the more interesting thing is the fact that Millsap did agree to go to Denver to play alongside Jokic. And what can this Denver Nuggets team be? A team that was very close to the Western Conference playoffs last year, fighting for that 8 seed. With Millsap now there, $30 million. I mean, hey, I guess why wouldn't you?
But are you doing it? But are you? Well, you're talking. Well, to your point, the European guard is Milos Teodosic, I believe his name is.
I'm not even going to try. Yes, Milos, MT. So he's that dude who has a lot of flair about his game. One of those wild passers, if you will. So we'll see. If he ends up getting the starting nod and everything in LA. But again, going back to Denver. This is a team that should be very interesting moving forward. They lost Gallo, but they got Millsap. And now guys like Gary Harris and Jamal Murray, it's their time to shine. Moutier will assume a backup role, I'd assume at this point now, and see what he can do with that. And Coach Malone and the Denver Nuggets have some promise a little bit going into the season in the Western Conference.
I guess the one thing that is going to be interesting for me is what are they going to do about that backcourt situation in Denver? Are you still riding with Moutier?
No. Like I'm saying, Moutier has to come off the bench if he's even still on the roster next year. I think they've realized if the LA Lakers punted on D'Angelo Russell, the Denver Nuggets are like, yo, Moutier can kick rock. So he may or may not be there, but he's not going to be the starter over Jamal Murray going into next season. Like that would just be.
All right. So there you have it. The Hawks punt. The Clippers, they're grounded temporarily. We got to see how the roster shapes up for the most part. I mean, because you essentially are talking about the fact that their bench is definitely going to be, there's going to be a whole new look to their bench, right? Now that Jamal Crawford's no longer a part of that. And
he may get bought out. Don't even know where he's going.
Yeah. So. And the Denver Nuggets, again, the Denver Nuggets clearly, I think it was inevitable that this needed to happen. I think Danilo Gallinari to me was one of those players that has just been hanging around a franchise like a year too long, right? So many injuries, and yet his style of play just it never grew on people in Denver. You know, um, do you see him thriving as a Clipper?
Gallo, I mean, I think here's the thing about this. Let me back up. He's the small forward the Clippers have always wanted and coveted, and they've got him a year late. If they could have fit him under that system with Chris Paul and Blake and DeAndre, maybe we're talking about a different Clippers organization right now. But Doc has long coveted Gallo from his days in Boston. There's been rumors about Gallinari for a very long time, and I agree. I think Denver wanted to at least give it one more year, with Gallo there to kind of see what they could do. They fell just short of making the playoffs, and Gallo was injured, and he continues to get injured on a regular basis. But I think he'll be okay in LA. Blake is going to be a guy who's going to facilitate a lot of the ball movement and be able to kick out to Gallo on the wing and on the perimeter. And I think he'll play well as long as he's healthy and understands his role. And Doc's going to want him to play a little bit more defense than he has been in years past. So I like the move for them. I just feel like, hey, a dollar short, if you will, when it comes to the Clippers and getting their man at small forward.
All right, man. So much happening already in free agency is definitely, underway. A lot of signings. There's probably a few more still down the pipeline that we're going to have to cover, but good stuff all around. And hey, man, some of these new faces in these new places, man, it's going to be tough, trying to keep up with them. But hopefully they will produce in ways that will certainly allow these teams to compete at a very high level. Once again, the NBA can be a funny thing in the offseason, brother. Funny thing.
That's wild. And, one more casualty, to maybe close out the show with. Monta Ellis waived by the Indiana Pacers. So he's on waivers as we record. No one's pretty much going to claim that guy. But somebody will sign him after he clears waivers. And I think in the right role.
Look, man, if the Golden State Warriors can sign Swaggy P, somebody has to sign Monte, okay?
Yeah, Ellis, I think he'll find a home somewhere. And, guys, some teams that maybe looking for to say, all right, well, we thought we were giving up, but now this guy became available, so we won't. That to me is like maybe the Memphis Grizzlies. If they lose Tony Allen or something like that, they're a team that's been starved for offense for a long time. Maybe they bring Monta in there to kind of be a bench scorer or something to that nature. I know Miami Heat is good for a reclamation project, but with Waiters back there and Josh Richardson, maybe that's not a right fit. But you never know. Even a team like the Toronto Raptors, they don't really have much bench scoring, so maybe Ellis goes there. So I think there's going to be a market for him, but it is a little bit ironic because I was just thinking, I was like, well, I don't like the fit of Oladipo and Ellis together playing at all. Like, I don't like that at all. But they go ahead and waive him the very next day. And the final thing with Indiana, too, they signed Darren Collison, to a 2-year deal, bringing him back. Whatever. Whatever.
Oh my goodness, man! It just keeps getting better and better, man. Just these reunion signings, man. How do you ignore them? You can't ignore them.
I mean, well, I'm ignoring that. I got nothing to say about Darren Collison going back to Indiana. So, hey, good luck to you, Pacers, Miles Turner. I wish you the best, bro. You're a good dude. I just don't think that team is going to be doing much of anything. So, hey, at least it opens up the door for some of the other teams in the Eastern Conference. Right, so might see some new blood in there.
Or someone will finally call up Nate Robinson. He'll bring it. Hey man, he was calling him. He was letting him know last season. He's like, I'm available. He might still be available, man. If they're gonna keep signing these dudes.
He came on Area 21 saying things like, hey, he's looking for that shot. Call me or whatever. So there's a lot of guys out there still potentially available. We're seeing a little bit of a flurry right now as some guys. As the Hayward smoke has kind of cleared, which is now allowing teams to figure out, okay, where they have money and what they can do with it. So more to come for sure, man. But as always, it's just a great show. I love just talking NBA. Summer League is well on the way. Vegas is starting over this weekend. So we'll jump right into all that conversation. I'm sure more rumors will come about, as the days and weeks go by, brother.
Definitely. So once again, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at Game Face Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know those: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn Player, Player FM, iHeartRadio, Google Music, Roku channel. So get any one of those platforms and be sure to check out the Baseline NBA podcast each and every single time we drop the show. Always welcome comments, thoughts, and definitely give us ratings whenever you have the opportunity. For the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys tuning in once again to a special edition of our free agency discussion. Be sure to check us out on the next episode of the Baseline NBA podcast. And for that, we'll catch up with you